Hi, everyone. I am so excited to talk to you about the subversive potential of XR in fine art and public access. But first, I want to give you just a brief history of how I got into this work and how it's evolved and where it's going. So drawing is my first language and really foundational to my practice. And through drawing, I interpret the human body as a site of struggle and resistance. And I'm really, really interested in the tension that's created between extremes and that kind of conceptual space of what's unfixed, unknowable, and ineffable. And one of the things I really love, just as a foreshadowing to the medium of AR, is that it too, to me anyway, occupies that same conceptual space. But another part of my practice that is equally important, and I would say essential and critical to this, and forms a kind of, I meant to mention that there's this sort of unholy alliance between the most ancient form of mark making and the most futuristic, and then with activism blended in. And this was all sort of borne out by a project that I initiated long ago at Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. And this ended up being one of the most formative experiences of my creative life. I don't know if anyone knows Homeboy Industries, but it's an extraordinary organization that serves gang-involved and formerly incarcerated youth. And I brought this project to them, this collaborative project, because I had independently developed a series called Bullet Blossoms, where I was exploring the tension again between violence and healing. And by doing that, I would shoot my paintings actually with bullets and then paint blossoms around the bullet holes. And I thought it would be so much more interesting if it were combined with stories that were far more compelling than just that one subject. So I brought the project to Homeboy, and what I did was I invited participants to tell their own stories through the democratic medium of collage. Collage is great because you don't have to be an accomplished artist, or you can be, it doesn't matter. It's equally compelling either way. And I'll show you some examples. But I was really astonished by the stories, the individual stories that people told. They didn't hold back at all. They incorporated their most precious objects into their work. And then they told me where to aim, and I shot the works. They told me what color to paint the blossoms, and I painted blossoms around the bullet holes. And among many other profound lessons I learned, one is, of course, that access to art is crucial. But also that including other voices in storytelling should be an ongoing life goal and something to which I would always be committed. So this really formed a very, very solid foundation for me in what was to follow. In the meantime, this struggle and in the body and violence and again, mitigating all of that continued in my personal work. I read voraciously, and I was super, super inspired by a book by the brilliant Susan Bryson called Aftermath, in which she, as a feminist philosopher, had suffered an excruciating and violent and traumatic sexual assault. And she was trying to make sense of it, and she couldn't really, because it was such an animal and embodied and visceral experience. And the only way she could really make sense of this assault was through philosophical math. And the way that she framed it was with this idea of a surd, and I actually called this series Surds. And a surd, I'm not a mathematician at all, but according to her, if I am interpreting this properly, a surd is an irrational or irreducible number, which when you introduce it into a sequence of predictable numbers or integers, like 2, 4, 6, 8 ad infinitum, it shatters the linearity, it shatters the predictability, and renders it chaotic. And I wanted to hold those two things very much in tension again. Our very human desire and impulse to find meaning and solace in pattern, in code, in predictability, but in tension with, and I punctured these very chaotic body forms with those mathematical sequences. And this was another one of those sort of turning point moments, because I had a woman come into my studio, and one of the things I'm always trying to do with my drawings anyway, and my immersive video experiences, is to create an empathic response for the viewer. I always want people to feel things in their bodies. I want them to respond first and foremost, not intellectually, but in their bodies. And this woman stood in front of this painting, this drawing on the left for quite a while, and she said, "That's exactly how I feel." And for me, I felt an almost greedy desire to make her feel it more. And I thought, oh God, I want to put her inside of it. I want her to be inside the drawing. So I started playing around and with the math and trying to make the drawings more sculptural, having them sort of extrude in some places and recede in others. And it just wasn't working. And like all forms of extreme frustration, it led to something, a kind of a breakthrough. A friend suggested I try drawing in VR, and I thought, well, why not? And so I did. And it proved immediately to be exactly the experience I was looking for, as an artist anyway, in terms of creating an even more embodied and empathic experience that was grounded in the 2D drawings that I had done. And I'm just going to show you an example. This is a video capture. If you are in this drawing, it actually, all of the animation is very glacial. It's going to appear that it's moving quickly here. It doesn't. But this is a piece I created called Hollow Point 101. And I wanted these drawings to exist in space as discrete art objects and give the viewer a lot of agency and choice in how and how they interacted with it. And no two people, as Jessica mentioned earlier, no two people do this the same way. So what's been fascinating is to watch where people, like where their attention inverts. Where do they go? What do they focus on? Do they lie on their backs and let it fall? Do they get up close? Do they get in it? Do they hang back? It's all very, very interesting to me. And it was super important to me that nothing in this experience was predetermined. To trust the viewer, to be interested and led by their own curiosity. And of course, if they weren't curious, they weren't. But to just give as much freedom in the experiencing of the art as possible. This was really important to me as a creator. And I also, just to underscore the relationship, to me, there's really no boundary between the 2D work that I make and the work I'm making in 360. Again, this is a sped up video. This is a piece that it actually falls very slowly. This was great, and I loved making these drawings in VR, but to experience them, you needed to come to an exhibition, or you needed to come to my studio, or have access to VR, a headset. And that just wasn't enough. I felt that call again to share the experience more broadly. And fortunately for me, right around this time, I was invited to show my VR drawings as public art on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. And so sandwiched in between ads for Ellen DeGeneres and Seth Meyers, these kind of apocalyptic moments would occur. And I'm amazed that we didn't have, I'm sure we had a lot of confusion. We did not have any crashes to speak of. But it really was, I was bitten by that bug again of public access and thinking, how could these be more accessible? I mean, it's great to make them accessible for commuters, but how could I share this work with a broader audience? And so I went to my brilliant tech partners at Drive Studios, and I started to ask them, well, how could we develop this further? How could we make this work available in another way? And around that time, we were talking a lot about AR, and the Fourth Wall app was basically born out of this conversation. So if you ignore the top two parts of the user interface, there are 4 VR drawings that have been translated into AR, and there's a studio experience, so you can walk through my studio, and there's a hologram of me speaking very earnestly about the conceptual underpinnings of my work. I encourage you all to skip that part. But I will say that what I really wanted to do was explode this idea of public art and really offer it back to the sort of idea of Homeboy, of offering raw material. Say, here's some material, let's collaborate. I'm gonna give you something I made. Now you take what I made and go crazy. Create your own content, your own context for work. And take it out, and take art outside of these hallowed, often intimidating institutions, museums, galleries, places where people often just don't go because they feel like they have to have a certain amount of knowledge to do it. And what was really joyful was the kind of play that ensued, the kind of creativity, the unbridled imagination that this harnessed in people. And it was super exciting because every time someone posted it, it served as this kind of public documentation and archive of a growing and ever expanding global public art exhibition, determined by individuals versus by institutions. So the other thing that was important to us, okay, this is gonna be deafening. Let me see if I can turn it down. This is in New York. So this is a tour of my studio. We really wanted to focus on access to every extreme. So we developed an in-studio teleport for people who were in any way compromised in terms of their mobility, so that they didn't have to walk around with their device, but they could actually just tap the screen and experience the work. And as you can see, people put them all over. This is the 5 train to the Bronx, you know, the Caribbean. People put them all over the world. They placed these works all over the world, and in doing so, created content. And this is one, I've seen this video 1,000 times, it's still my favorite. Someone put one of the drawings on the baggage claim carousel at LAX. It's just amazing. Another in her guitar classroom, like some unruly student who just, you know, stuck around. But one of the most profound experiences that someone posted was actually by a friend of mine who's an artist, and she does a lot of activist work at the border. Her name is Tanya Ganiga, and she wanted to illustrate how art should be borderless. So she placed one of the drawings, Hollow Point 101, in America and pulled it into Mexico through the border wall. And this was a very a profound sort of another light bulb moment for me, because I thought, okay, this takes the content creation to a new level. And I went back to my partners and I said, how can we augment this platform? How can we expand the platform in this incredibly polarized moment that we're in? How can we make it work even better, engaging these kinds of ideas? And this was the birth of Coordinates, which is a platform for collaborative resistance and inclusive resistance. And basically they said, look, what we can do right now at the time is geolocation. And when they said that to me, I thought, okay, so what I want to do, if the globe is sort of our canvas, I want to invite other artists like Tanya, and she was actually one of the first artists I invited, who are working rigorously and topically to choose sites of historic, cultural, or political importance to them and pair it with a piece of art where it would have the most resonance. So outside of any 4 white walls of any institution, but again, where would that piece speak volumes? Where would it spark the most thoughtful discourse? And this is where, and this also scratched an itch that I have to be subversive, because of course you can't see these works without the device. They are unseen. But it allows you to see them in context, in situ, and then consider them there. And for example, this is a piece for a Defining Line is an exhibition I co-curated along the LA River, which dealt with immigration, gentrification, colonization, climate change. This piece deals directly with climate change. And it's over at the LA State Historic Park. And this amazing thing happens once you start working this way, which is that those pieces that you place on site occupy this strange ghost realm. So when I drive past LA State Historic Park, I don't pull out my phone because I will crash, and I'm always tempted to do it. But I know it's there, and it haunts me. And so I love this idea of idea activation. In many ways, it's that the idea has been activated, and there's this thought space that exists in that location at that point. And I love this because everywhere I go, I feel it. But as someone, I wanted to be the first guinea pig, so I put one of my paintings called Hurt Colors. I've done a lot of research on the Civil War because of our current moment, which feels like a cultural civil war. And I put it over the site of the massacre in Vegas. I had another opportunity to put a piece back to the Surge series because of, it was during the time of now Justice Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings, and Dr. Blasey Ford was giving her testimony, and I put this piece there and I added the word unprotected because we're still unprotected equally under the Constitution. ERA has never been ratified and probably never will be, at least not for the immediate future. And the most magical part of this experience was collaborating with a stranger on the ground. So I couldn't be a DC, but I had to rely on a friend of a friend of a friend who had 30 minutes, who shared my sort of guerrilla activist impulse to stand in front of the Supreme Court and hold up her phone and not live tweet, but live with me, go through, it's too far over, it's too big, it's facing the wrong way. And we finally got it placed, and it was absolutely thrilling. These are some other examples of artists who've done, Coordinates artists, Tanya's piece over the, border wall in Tijuana, Nicole Hebron's over Dodger Stadium, where a number of Mexican-American families were dislocated, Carolina Quesado over the LA River, Michelle Aslan's piece in front of the reflecting pool. This was when all the parents were being deported. And then one of my favorite pieces is actually a Tongva piece that we included in Defining Line over the original water wheel. Not a lot of people in Los Angeles know Tongva. They've never seen it spoken, heard it spoken, or seen it written. And we had this wonderful interview that we conducted with two of their elders, one who was 13 years old and one who was her great-grandmother. So it really allowed us to share untold stories, untold histories, unknown histories. And that's another part of its great potential. At the time, I was invited to do a project at Desert X, which is a biennial in the Coachella Valley, and the curators asked me to choose 2 sites. And I chose 2 that bookended the valley, because I wanted to create a kind of call and response, and they were both related to climate change and human intervention on the land. And one was a site marked by terminal toxic environmental damage, that would be the Salton Sea, and another which asked viewers to imagine the fate of desert life and lives when often sacred lands are raised in the interests of development, even if it's for renewable energy and resources. And this piece is called Revolutions, and it's over the wind farm. This was taken actually by some intrepid videographer. And it was this opportunity to take up space, to be monumental. And as a female artist and as someone who's working with land art, that was also incredibly thrilling because it also did no environmental harm. In addition, at the Salton Sea, this is called Margin of Error, and this drawing really asks the viewer to consider the ungovernable nature of nature itself, and artifice, and magical thinking, and particulate life and death, and peril and beauty, and all of that mixed up at once. And one of the extraordinary things that happened in this moment, and actually also at the Revolution site, is that oftentimes, someone would have forgotten to download the app, or they didn't have Wi-Fi, or they didn't have the right generation phone, but someone did. Someone always did. And these spontaneous communities would gather around the person with the device that worked, and these impromptu conversations and bonding would occur. And people would start talking about the content of the work. What does this mean? What does it mean to be here? What does it say about what's going on in the world? And can you send me that video? Can you take a picture of me over here with the thing? Anyway, I hope that continues to happen at all of this site-specific work, because I think it's really important, and it's an important inversion of what we expect from technology and from this particular type of technology. Which brings me to my latest project, which I'm super excited about, back to our sort of cultural civil war. I've been thinking a lot about battlegrounds and about contested sites after Charlottesville, after a number of things that have happened, and I wanted to reach out to a community. There's a lot going on in LA, there's a lot going on in New York, but I really wanted to reach out to communities in the Deep South, where some of these stories may yet be untold, and I can't even tell you what it's opened up. And so our first project is in New Orleans, and I'm delighted to give you a sneak peek, a teaser, at one of the pieces that we have already placed. And we've asked a lot of the artists there with curiosity and invited them to say, what is a contested site to you? What does a battleground mean to you? Is it a Confederate statue site? Is it a polluted estuary? Is it the last and only abortion clinic? Is it a petrochemical plant? What is it to you? Not for us to say what it is, but what does it mean to your community, and to develop community programming around this citywide exhibition? This is a piece by Chandra McCormick, who is a brilliant photographer, and this is the Holy Family Spiritual Church. It was destroyed by Katrina. It was never rebuilt. It was one of many essential neighborhood churches in the lower Ninth Ward. They were reviled by most outsiders as voodoo and black magic churches, but they were places of healing. And this is a convening of the female bishops. It's a very important place, and she wanted to mark the site. She wanted to say, no, this happened, this was important, and this is part of the fabric of our community. So as I close, I just want to invite and encourage and exhort you all to use technology at your disposal to disrupt and invert and alter expectations, and to create connections, and to democratize the experience as much as possible, and introduce ideas in new and unexpected ways. And I want to end with a quotation from Susan Sontag. You may have heard it before, but it bears repeating. She said, "Compassion is an unstable emotion. It needs to be translated into action, or it withers." Thank you very much.